What's going on, guys? This is Jacob, and today I wanted to do an album review. I know I've mentioned music and related lists and that sort of thing in the past, so listened to an album recently that kind of caught my ear, and I just wanted to share some thoughts with you guys. I've especially seen various songs from this album kind of being discussed in their own standalone videos, so I wanted to take a comprehensive approach and review this album. That, of course, being Djesse Volume 4 by Jacob Collier. Now, a little bit of background for those of you unfamiliar. Jacob Collier is a multi-instrumentalist, vocalist, kind of one-man band of sorts. Very, very strong technical ability in a lot of his videos. He's often harmonizing with other videos, kind of putting his own spin on various other people's acapellas and building around them in these very beautiful chord progressions. And I've always been a fan of his music, starting with his early In My Room album, which honestly is maybe still my favorite album of his to this point. But specifically with this series of Djesse albums, there are 4 in total, so this one that just released kind of concludes that series, but the first volume started back in 2018, and of course I've heard all of the previous entries at this point, but really the fact that it spanned that long and there's so much content to be found within these albums. He stated many times in interviews that he really wanted the Djesse series to be a much more collaborative and expansive set of albums, and I think he really succeeded in that. But to quickly breeze through some of the previous entries, Volume 1 has a very much more orchestral approach, very large sound to it all. I wouldn't say it's my favorite out of the bunch, but it's definitely a good entry to kind of show what he's capable of. And then we go to Volume 2, which has previously been my favorite of the series thus far, which includes much more of an earthier tone, with plenty of folk songs, guitars, and much more of the Collier songwriting that maybe we've been used to at this point. Then we get into Volume 3, which takes a much more electronic and kind of contemporary R&B approach that has several, features of people in that space. And now that brings us to Volume 4, which kind of combines a lot of what was learned in the first 3 volumes into this. Something I will note about this album is that there were 8 singles before this album actually released. The first of those being from 2022, and then kind of progressively releasing from there. Now, Volume 4 isn't the most approachable album, coming in at 16 songs and like an hour and 7-ish minutes. It definitely is a lot and can seem very overwhelming to kind of dive into this album. And I know it hasn't been out for very long, so my feelings and thoughts might change over time with this album. There's a lot to take in, but these are a lot of the initial thoughts that I had. So there's my disclaimer. Let's get into this album. The first song from this album, 100,000 Voices, opens like you're entering the world of Djesse, essentially. It starts with a very orchestral warm-up of some sort, and honestly, I think this is some of Collier's best vocal performances, like, as of yet. Maybe something with like the mic placement, or it almost has a very live feel to it, which makes sense. He uses a lot of his audience choir to kind of mesh into the song. And you hear it all throughout the album, but especially on this one. It's a fantastic opening that really gets you into that. Also, I can't skip the song without mentioning the heavy metal like outro where he's talking in a cafe or something. He's like, "Yeah, do you guys have any?" And then just like screams and like heavy tones just start blaring. It's like, whoa, okay, 100 Gex. Like, I didn't realize that's what we were tuning into here. But that leads us directly into She Put Sunshine, which definitely has like the opposite vibe of whatever that outro was. This song almost sounds like an Owl City song. Like, it's got that kind of cheese factor. With some of the lyrics, she put sunshine into my internet, and there's like little dial-up noises and whatnot. I mean, it's fine. It's a pretty good song overall. That takes us into Little Blue featuring Brandi Carlile. This was another single. This one's nice. It's nothing like too notable, but I really do enjoy the like very chill and dreamscapey guitar outro. So that's a highlight for me. From there, we go into Well, which is another single, and I wasn't really sure that this one was going to be on the album. It just seemed like kind of its own standalone thing, but I'm actually kind of glad it made it, because I feel like within the context of the album, it grew on me a decent amount more. It's a nice little power pop slammer. What's not to like? From there, we go into Cinnamon Crush featuring Lindsay Lomas, which is a really cool title for a song. Cinnamon Crush. Just, you can kind of like imagine it. It's got a lot of imagery just in the title. The song itself, I mean, it's like a nice like low-key R&B kind of track. You know, it almost harkens me back to Feel from Volume 2, which is a very like D'Angelo kind of inspired song. I would say, I mean, it's a good song. I would say it's maybe like the least memorable, like so far from the songs that have been on this album. I will say this probably would have been one of the better cuts from Volume 3 if it were on there. I think it would fit in quite nicely. Then we get into Wherever I Go featuring Lawrence and Michael McDonald, another single. Right out of the gate, I was like, is this like sampling Digital Love? I mean, which is already sampling something, but I digress. Digital Love by Daft Punk, of course. Just with the kind of Rhodesy piano going on there, really kind of reminded me of that. Yeah, I think this one has like a pretty good progression. I remember listening to it as a single and I was like, okay. Again, within the context of the album though, I think this actually works decently well. Then we move into Summer Rain. This song is pretty. I honestly kind of had to listen to it again because I couldn't quite remember it. I feel it drags just a little bit, and I don't know. Maybe this would have been a bit more effective if this was placed like somewhere else in the album. But yeah, it's nice. It has a lot of nice and pretty textures going on. You know, that kind of gets us near the halfway point of the album. You know, at this point so far, I want to say maybe tracks kind of 5 through 7 somewhat drag the pace a little bit. You know, it really kicks off strong with the first, you know, few tracks and then kind of gets slow and a little longer, you know, but it hasn't lost my interest yet. I think this album so far has felt much more cohesive than previous entries. So then we get into one of my favorite songs from the album, A Rock Somewhere, and I'm not going to try to pronounce these features. I feel like I would just kind of butcher them, but this is still a bit of a long song, but actually one of the better ones. I really think the Indian influence really makes this one unique and honestly like takes you to another world or another rock somewhere. So I gotta give props for that. Really, the atmosphere on this one is like probably the best out of any of the songs I've heard so far. So yeah, this one's a highlight for sure. This of course takes us in the Me-core zone, which is another single. I wasn't like too fond of this on my first listen as a single. I think it was fine, but in the context of the album, coming after the last track, you're kind of like traveling the world in a way, you know, in the way some of these songs are sequenced here. But yeah, I mean, this one's like nothing like too notable. The synths are pretty cool in the drop. Kind of gives me some like wonky Pomrad energy, if you're familiar with Pomrad. Shout out if you are. From there, we go to Witness Me with Shawn Mendes and Stormzy. Another single. I feel like I'm going to have to mention that because, again, there's 8 singles, but that's okay. There's a lot of songs on this album. I didn't really listen to this one as much, just kind of on its own. But I will say, like, in the context of the album, it didn't really throw me off or anything. Like, whoa, what is this? Like, I actually quite enjoyed the inspiring sort of gospel sound. And Stormzy adds a lot of variety here, too. I quite liked his verse. Just kind of catches your ear compared to some of the maybe slower paced songs that we've heard up until this point. Of course, I say slower pace, which brings us to the next song, which is yet another kind of slow jammer. But Never Gonna Be Alone with John Mayer and Lizzie McAlpine, if I'm saying that right. Another single, and this was the earliest single from 2022, which I remember when this kind of released as its own. I'm like, wow, I really like this one. I've had this one saved, and so was very familiar with it going into it. Atmosphere here is wonderful. The songwriting is probably like one of like Jacob's most solid and cohesive. And John Mayer's just a chef's kiss with his guitar solo. Really good song here. Very chill. Now that brings us into the massive and absolutely breathtaking Bridge Over Troubled Water with John Legend, Tori Kelly, and Yebba. If that's not already a stacked lineup, you know, going into the song, yes, it's another single. A lot of people already had this song kind of in the back of their head. Jacob sort of did an I Harm You sort of style a cappella cover with Yebba's original like YouTube video, which you can go find, and It was such a popular one, but it kind of cut off at the end and left a lot of people wanting just so much more. And I'm so glad he chose this song. I mean, oh my goodness. This is the song I've seen so many YouTubers kind of commenting about and reviewing just the song itself because it's just such a complex, it's all a cappella, But just the vocal stacking, the harmonies. I mean, I very well could just make a whole video talking about this song. Not to mention his Logic breakdown, his session is so cool, of where he just kind of goes into the intricacies of like how he recorded and where he decided to put his vocals and arrange it all. So cool, very inspiring, you know, as an artist myself, of like how he does this stuff. Just really awesome. I honestly wouldn't mind like a full album of his like I Harm You acapella, you know, style songs. Like, they're really good. So I guess from here we go into Over You, which is definitely a bit jarring coming from the last song. I feel like I'm like still trying to process what just happened. And then we kind of get into this like fun, like little future bass K-pop kind of thing with aespa and Chris Martin of Coldplay, which just such a unique collaboration. Like, who would have thought? Honestly, I don't like fully mind this one though. It was a little silly when I first heard it, and maybe that's kind of the point. But I quite like it. The production's very nice. It almost sounds like something Madeon would produce. Maybe he had a hand in it. Who knows? I mean, with Collier performing at Porter Robinson's Nurture event. Could very well be, you know, who knows? So we're almost done at this point. We get into Box of Stars Part 1 with a handful of features, a lot of kind of just rapping, vocal interludes, very tiny like things, lots of transitions, opening choir. There's a ton happening in this song. I don't know that it fully like paid off for me though. It's almost just too much to pay attention to, and then like the little knockings that are like panned to the left and the right kind of like throw me off. I'm like looking behind my shoulder, like it feels like it's like happening in your room, which is for me maybe just a little distracting. But then we get into Box of Stars Part 2, which I quite prefer over Part 1. It's much more epic, and I think this ties a lot into more of the Djesse themes and motifs. Harkens me quite a bit back to Volume 1, but just a lot more cohesive and full sounding. Also, shout out to the like THX choir like melding, meshing at the end. It's very wild stuff. But yeah, this is like a great almost like theme song or finishing song for the Djesse series. But of course, there is still one more song after that, which is World O World. Not a whole lot to say here, but I could easily see this being transcribed for like honor choirs. You know, like as a choir kid myself, I can definitely appreciate what this song is going for. I think that's a large reason why I like a lot of Jacob Collier's work. I know he gets a lot of flack for just kind of doing too much and being kind of too crazy and you know, trying too many things, but I quite like the ambition, even if it doesn't always work out. I gotta give credit where credit is due for like just trying some of these things. So that's Djesse Volume 4. I wanted to go through every single track just because I didn't really want to leave any stones unturned, and I think they all kind of like add to the album in some way, shape, or form. You know, I know how it is kind of sequencing an album and picking songs. I'm sure there were probably quite a handful that maybe didn't make this album, and I'm always curious to see maybe what didn't, what did, and, you know, how it arrived to where it did. But I think, honestly, for, like, this album, as I said, it's so much more cohesive. I don't know if it's the production or just the atmosphere. It doesn't seem like there's a lot of like empty space. Like every song seems fitting in some way, shape, or form, and the atmosphere kind of overall really carries through. And so I quite appreciate that. The pacing's pretty good. As I said, it does kind of drag in the middle at times with some of the very slow songs. But I wouldn't say they're like distracting enough to like detract from the overall experience. So yeah, I would give this one a 4 out of 5 stars. You may have thought I was going for the out of 10 system, but hey, as a Rate Your Music user, we use the star system. So there we go. So there's Djesse Volume 4. What did you guys think of this album? Have you heard it yet? I know it just kind of came out. Let me know in the comments. And if you have another album that maybe you're interested in, or maybe you would think I would like or would want to see me review, definitely let me know that as well. As of now, this has been Jacob. Peace out.